Hi and welcome back to part 6 of this video series. Today we're going to go through these tasks. All of these are some part of making it possible to add invoices from the front end. But we can begin simple and create a simple page for adding invoices. Just so we can test that we can go to the page. So inside the dashboard folder, create a new file, add invoice.vue. And here we can add the template and the script tag, name, add invoice. And I know I'm going to use the Axios, so import Axios from Axios. And I want to import the toast because we want to show a toast when you're adding the invoice. And we can add the data array with just one property, which is invoice. And then we can do something with the template. Div class page add invoice, and I want the multi-line columns here and one column for showing the title. So h1 class title add invoice, and now we close the h1, close the div, close that div and close that div. And then we can continue by going to the router to import this view. Just copy this, set add for in front there, add there, scroll down a little bit and find the invoices here, copy this and append add and add invoice, copy and replace and save. So now we have added it to the router and we can close this file. And then the last step now is to go into app.vue and create a button up in the menu. So I want it to be a green button next to my account button. So router link to /dashboard/invoices/add class button is success. It's a nice and green button. Add invoice. And then we close the router link and save. So if I now go back to the browser, we have a brand new button here. And if I click it, we will see the title, which is the only thing we added to the template so far. But that means that the first task is done. And I can set this to done like that. I try to break this task into several smaller parts because adding the invoices is probably the most difficult thing we're going to do in this project. But now we can do the next part of this task, which is to get and select the clients. So the first thing I'm going to do in here now is to go in here and add a client property, which we're going to use later. And I also want one more list in here for getting the clients, like that. And in here I say async mounted, which is the lifecycle hook from Vue. And then we say await this.get clients. So this is a function for getting all the clients I'm going to create. So if I just copy that, go down here, say methods, get clients, and in here I want to call Axios.post/API/v1 clients. And remember to have the slash at the end there. And then we get a response from the server. And when we get that, we can just say this.client equals response.data, because that is an array of clients. And if there are any errors, you can just show them in the console. And that's it for this script part. But now we need to do some changes to the template. So if I just copy this column, and then add a simple title with MB4, which is margin bottom 4. So we have a little bit space below the title. And here I add a div class select. This is a Bulma class for styling the select boxes. And then I create a select element, set the name to client and vmodel to invoice.client. So it references this object. First, I add an empty option for select client. And then I also add one more option, which we're going to loop through. So for every client in clients, we create a new option and then we bind the key to client.id and we also bind the value to client. So we set the whole object of client as the value. And then we just display the client.name as the select option. So now I can close this, and close that one. And then we are going to make it possible to that when we select one of these clients, we are going to reference or set this to a client or an object. So right now this is empty, which means that this is going to be the one which is selected, but when we select one of this, the client you select will be changed and set into this one. So below here, I create a new box with empty 4, which is margin top 4, and this will only show if invoice.client has been selected in this list. And if it has, we want to show the client name. And we just say invoice.client.name, since we set the whole object in this value. And then I just paste in the code for showing the email, the address, the zip code, country, and similar, just like we have done other places. So then we can set this to now close that div and save. Okay, there seems to be an error. Want to inspect to see what this error can be. I go into the network tab, refresh, click clients. This field is required. Of course, because it's not supposed to be a post, this is supposed to be a get. Sorry. So if I just save now and go back and refresh, this should be now a list of the clients you have, but I see that this isn't selected. So if I just go back here again and set this one to selected like that, if I now refresh. So the reason why this isn't selected is because we set this to an object and not to an empty string like this actually is. So if you now go back, you will see select client instead of the white box. And if I say click this one will pop up and you see that we have selected client code and then we have some contact information. Perfect. So now we have the ability to get and select a client. Before I continue, I just want to say thanks to my Patreons. Next, I want to do something similar, but now I want to make it possible to add items for the invoice. So if I just go back to this file again, and inside here, I want to create a list of items. So items, and I want to add one empty item. This is default. I want to set the item num to 0. This is just a unique ID for adding the element. Title can be set to empty. Unit price can be set to empty. Quantity can be set to 1. Watt rate can be set to 0. And net amount can also be set to 0. And save. And now I want to introduce components, because I want a form for adding new items to be a component. So if I just go into this folder, create a new file called itemform.vue. Then I can add the empty template tag and the script, name item form. And in here I want the div class columns, because I want the fields to be listed next to each other. First I had the div class column is 3 with a field, label title and control with input type text, and then I bind the v model to item.title. I will come back to this object very soon. And I do then below the column I had one more column for price. Class input is type text and the v model is bind to unit price. And I do the same for quantity, but here I said type number because I expect this to be a number and not a string. And below there I had the select list for the VAT rate. Here in Norway we have 0, 14 and 28. I think that's the most used at least. So this can be changed according to what you have in your country. and I bind this select list to the item.watt_rate. And all the way to the right on this column, I want a field for the gross amount. This is disabled because you're not supposed to be able to change this. And I bind this value to gross amount and not to the item. And then we need a way to pass in the item to this component. And to do that, we use something called properties. And short for that is props. And this is an object, and here I can say initial item object, because I expect that initial item is a type of object. And then we add the data array, return item. So I want to override this because this is an immutable object which you cannot or shouldn't change, at least. If not, instead I just create a new item and I set it to this.initial item. So I make a copy of this object. And I want to create something called a computed property for the gross amount. So every time we change either the price, the quantity, or the VAT rate, this should be recalculated. And then we say computed. This can be a list of different values, but we only want gross amount. Like that. Const unit price equals this.item.unit price. And I want the quantity equals this.item.quantity. Const watt rate equals this.item.watt rate. And then to calculate the net amount, we say this.item.net amount equals unit price, and just multiply it with quantity, because net amount is without the watt rate. And to now return the gross amount, we say return this.item.net amount plus this.item.net amount multiplied with watt rate and divide it by 100 and save. And that is the component. And this is reusable, so we could use it other places in this project as well. And to use it in the add invoice file here now, I can say import item form from @/components. Just means the root folder. Item form.vue. And then I also need to register it here by saying components. And this is an object. Here just say item form. And before I include it, I just want to scroll to the bottom and add some styling. Style, lang as CSS. And here I just want to say .select and .select with 100%. So it's very little styling for now. And then we want to show the item form. So below this column here, if I scroll down here, we say div class column is 12. And we want a simple title. H2 class is size 5 MB 4. So it's the same as the other titles, items. And close the H2. And now we want to use the item form component. So we say item form. And we can loop through the items in the invoice by saying v4 item in invoice.items. And v bind key item.num. Item num. And we also now want to bind the vbind initial item, which is the property we refer to here, with item. So then we just pass in the whole item. Now we can close this and we can close the div and save. So if I now go back here, you'll see that we have a simple form here. And if I write something here, and the price, you will see that the gross amount is updated automatically. Also, if I increase this, it increases, and if I say 25% VAT rate, it added it here. Perfect. And we should also have a button here for adding multiple items. So below this item form, I can just say button class button is light, light plus, and when we click this button at click, we want to call a new method called add item. So let's scroll down and create it by going into methods and below this. And here we can just add this invoice.items.push, create a new object, and then I can just make a copy of these values. But instead of saying item num0 now, we say this.invoice.items.length. So the next one will be 1 and then 2 and 3, etc. So we can save this now and refresh. I'll say item 1, 100 plus, now we go to one new line, item 2, 200, like that. Perfect. So now we have the ability to add items as well to the invoice. So then I can go back to the to-do list as it is task to done. Next step is to calculate the different values, because here we want to show the total net amount, the total gross amount, etc. So if I just go back here and scroll up, and below this div, create one more div class column is 12, and then add the title total, then add 3 paragraphs, net amount, VAT amount, and gross amount, which just refers to invoice.this. All of this will be set very soon. If I just scroll down into the invoice, below items, I can say net amount 0, VAT amount 0, and gross amount 0. And save. So if I now go back, you'll see that these are all set to 0. And if I change this, nothing happens here. So then we need to make it possible to send information from this item form. So every time we call this gross amount, we want to send back information back to the parent. So here where we show the item form, we say v on update price. So when we get this from this component, we want to call a new function called update totals. This function will be created down here in the method list. So below here is the update totals. First I want to create a new variable net amount 0 and let VAT amount equal 0. These are just local for this function. And then I want to get the item we are going to update. And to get it, we need to add changed item into here as a parameter, and then we get it from the invoice items list by saying filter item, or I for short, dot item num is the same as the one we passed back from the item form component. I will show you how we do that very soon. And then we can say item equals changed item. So we change the value of this to the values we get from the component. And then I want to loop through all of the items. So just for let I 0, and while I is lower than the number of items we have in the invoice, we call I++ and we go into this loop. Then we create a new VAT rate variable based on the VAT rate from the item we have in this loop. And then we say VAT amount, which is this variable, plus equals the net amount, which we calculated here. And we multiply it with the VAT rate divided by 100. And we can do the same for net amount plus equals, and just copy this. So this is the total for the whole invoice well, this is just the total for the item. Now we can close the for loop. And then we say this.invoice.net amount, which is this variable up here, which we are showing here. And that we set it to this one which we just created. And the same one with what amount, and the gross amount can just be net amount plus what amount. And this .invoice.discount amount, we set this to 0. I will come back to the discount amount in a later part of this series. But this will still not work because we have to go into the item form and emit this data back to the add invoice. So below here, when we have done this, we can say this $emit, so we emit something back, which is the update price, which is the function we are listening to here. So v on update price, and then we just pass in this .item, and this .item is the one we have in this item form, and it is the one we get inside the function here, changed item. So if I now save, refresh, title 100, now you saw that the net amount increased to 100 and also the gross amount. If I change this to 25, you see the what amount is 25. And if I add more products, you'll see that this keeps increasing. Perfect. So now everything with the items is done, and I can set this task to done as well. Last step now is to send all this information back to the server. So the first thing I want to do then is to go into the Django part and do a little change here in the invoice serializer, because I want to remove this field, because it's going to block a few things and make the adding difficult. So I will come back to this and show you how we will fix it. And if I now go back here and hit invoices, you will see the ID of the client and not the name. But since we saved the name of the client, we can just go into invoices and say client name, because we have access to that. So now it's working. Perfect. And I can go back to the add invoice functionality. And then I just want to go into the views for the invoice and do a little change here on the create functionality. So below where we got the theme, I want to get the current invoice number, which are going to add to the invoice we are creating. And then below here, I want to increase this for the next time. And when we've done that, we can call theme.save. And then we can just continue and set serializer.save. But we also need to add a little bit more data here, because now I set created by and theme, but we also need modified by equals self.request.user and invoice number equals invoice number. And then everything there should be okay. So if we go back to add invoice, we can create a button for submitting the form. Just copy this column. Button class button is success. So it's nice and green. At click, submit form, save button. And then we can close this div as well. So then we need to create this function or method at the bottom of the list here, like that. And since we now have this.invoice.client has all the information, but we still need to set the client name, the client email, etc. And that needs to be fixed here. And to do that, we just say this.invoice.client_name equals this.invoice.client.name and do it for all of the other fields. And when that's finished, we need to replace this by saying this.invoice.client and set it to the ID of the client, because that is what the backend expects. And when that's done, all of the data is ready, and we can say Axios post API/v1 invoices, and we want to send this .invoice, which is the object with all of the client information, the items, etc. Then we say .then response, create a fat arrow function, and if it's okay, we say the invoice was added, and show the toast at the bottom right corner. And then we can say this.router.push, then we can be sent back to /dashboard/invoices, so we see the list of invoices. If there are any errors, we can just show them in the console. We'll come back to all of the error handling later. But if you try to submit now, we'll get a few errors because we need to fix a little bit with the items, because the items need to be connected better with the invoice serializer. And to do that, we just scroll down and take all of this code, cut it out of there, scroll to the top and paste it above this serializer. And then we need to go over here in the top and say items equals item serializer, many equals true. And I also need to copy this and append items at the bottom of the list there. Okay, so now we are getting there, but we also need to override the create function for the serializer. So this is not the same as perform create here, because here we can't do this. So here is a def create self validated data, and then we want to get the items data from the validated data. This is the form data, and pop, so we just pop it out of the list. So now we have a variable with the information of the items, and then we create a new invoice by saying invoice.object.create, and we pass in the validated data. And then we want to loop through this items data and create one item per iteration. So for item in items data, item.objects.create invoice equals invoice. So here we reference this invoice we just created, and item, which is just an array of information with all the fields we need. And when that's done, we say return invoice and save. So yes, everything here should be okay now, and we can test the functionality. So if we select this client, add one line, title 100 or 1000, save, and now it's redirected back here. We got a new invoice number 3, amount is 1000, is paid. And if I go in here, you will see this, and you see the item that we created. Perfect. And then I can go back to the to-do list and set this task to done. And that was it for this part. Hope you enjoyed it and that it wasn't too hard to follow along. If you have any questions about the things I've done in this part, feel free to leave a comment and I'll answer as soon as I can. If you want notification when the next part is published, you need to subscribe to my channel and also remember to click the bell. See you in the next video.